Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe. I'm joined today by Allison Wilson and Grace Blest-Hopley, both working closely with Heroic Hearts Project. How are you both doing today?
Very well, thank you, Joe.
Great. Lovely. So, I guess, Grace, where are you calling in from today?
So I'm calling in from London, which is where I am based, and how I sort of came to be part of Heroic Hearts, which was joining the Heroic Hearts Project UK team. But I'm very much part of the US team and the US operations, and so I guess a lot of my presence is largely virtual in terms of my work with Heroic Hearts.
Wonderful. And Allison, how about yourself? Where are you calling in from?
I am calling in from Colorado right now.
Oh, really? Just around the corner.
Yes.
I'm up in Breckenridge.
We're going there tomorrow.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
Let's have a coffee. I
Yes,
met
please.
Jesse for the first time in downtown Denver, actually. That was fun.
Okay.
Years and years ago.
Wonderful.
I think could have been like 7 years ago, maybe. So I've been a fan of Heroic Hearts Project for quite a long time. So thank you both for your work on the project. And I hope it's exciting and fulfilling, despite, grant funding can always be exciting too. I heard earlier.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So I guess let's dig in first. Grace, you're doing some research work for Heroic Hearts Project. Can you talk a little bit about just super high level what's going on there with the research project?
Yeah, of course. So we've been running some research for nearly 3 years now, alongside Imperial College London. So there's the psychedelic research group there who have a piece of research that's been ongoing for a while that has been looking at people going through these retreats. We were able to partner with them a few years ago, and essentially what we now do at Heroic Hearts is everybody who goes through one of our retreat programs is invited to take part in a piece of research. We take a baseline measure off them. That's largely just a questionnaire that we do online, and then we follow up with a similar kind of post-retreat time point that is around 4 weeks after they finish the program. So we have this kind of before and after sort of data collection that happens either side of them sort of going through the preparation, the retreat, the integration. So we're sort of measuring the effect of that whole program. We do have some slightly more intricate research that we've been able to do where we've gotten on site with particular retreats and collected EEG data, also collecting sort of pre and post ceremony data, and essentially kind of looking at all the different ways that we can measure how we are affecting not just these people's sort of mental health, but also their potential functioning and other such markers of things like post-traumatic stress disorder.
Beautiful. And Allison, can you talk a little bit about what you're up to?
Sure. So I founded the Hope Project. It's been about 4 years now, and it is a nonprofit to support veteran spouses that got pretty big pretty fast. And we also serve veteran women and also Gold Star spouses as well. I am the spouse to a Navy SEAL and just saw a need in supporting the spouse piece too, and really not only giving them support on how to hold space for their veterans, like when they came home from a psychedelic journey, but also to let them realize that they could also have this option to go to their own journey too. Heroic Hearts has been a huge supporter of Hope Project since day one. We've worked really closely with Jesse and the team and just been able to support the family members of the veterans that go through Heroic Hearts Project. So about a year and a half ago, we decided to merge. It has turned into a beautiful partnership, and now we've been able to encompass the entire family unit. So not only are we able to give the spouses their own coaching, but we're able to now create our own spouse retreats. So we have been doing those retreats in Mexico now for the last year and a half, and working with Grace, we are doing some really amazing research on secondary PTSD for the spouses and the family members.
Grace, could you tell us what, I'm pretty sure most people can intuit this. What is secondary PTSD?
Yeah, I mean, secondary PTSD is something that is not fully defined. It's certainly not defined in terms of sort of DSM literature. And I think it's probably one that's quite difficult to define anyway within a particular person. But I guess secondary PTSD in the context here is the idea that somebody is experiencing symptoms as a result of having lived through a traumatic experience, having heard about it secondhand. So in the case of a spouse of a veteran, it would be hearing about a traumatic event that their partner went through when they were serving, and just the shock of having heard about that event would be enough to trigger a response within them and then go on to develop something like post-traumatic stress disorder. It's also something that can be described as compassion fatigue, which is, kind of literally as it sounds, when you are so preoccupied and concerned for another person's well-being that it becomes a personal drain on yourself and your own emotions. But one thing I would like to sort of talk about when we sort of frame what secondary PTSD is, particularly here for military spouses, is also that around sort of the idea of being isolated when your partner is away, which can be very kind of emotionally draining in itself, but also this sort of high hypervigilance that comes around, this continuous sort of waiting for bad news to happen, and your brain sort of constantly being in that sort of prepped state for hearing that. And then on return of the partner, particularly if that partner is experiencing PTSD themselves, this hypervigilance that then forms around emotionally monitoring that person, but also things like if there's a loud bang, immediately thinking, I need to go and sort that out so that it doesn't trigger the other person. So this kind of secondary PTSD in the sense of you are increasingly vigilant to the mental state of another person to the point where it is damaging to your own.
That's I hope we flesh that out as a more clearly defined disorder. I remember somebody telling me an abuse story years ago, and it actually stuck with me in a really ugly way for months. And I'm like, okay, I can relate. Thankfully, it didn't stick around for years, and I'm not like in a close relationship with that person. But yeah, it's interesting how easy it is to pick stuff up from other folks. We'll put it. Maybe.
But also, if we think about it in this context and we really think about what trauma really is a very fundamental feeling of not feeling safe.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about, often the primary breadwinner and key person from a family going often overseas into a combat zone. And so you can understand why a spouse might perceive their safety to be at threat. Because if they lose their partner, they may lose their financial security as well as their emotional security. Their children may lose a parent. So, it's very much about this sort of loss of feeling of safety.
Mm-hmm. Allison, do you have anything to add? I'm sure you've witnessed this.
Yeah, so I like to call the spouses like they are the boots on the ground at home, right? Like you have the boots on the ground overseas, but we're like the literal boots on the ground at home. And I think that there's a very particular person that goes into the military, and that's someone that can easily have an armor built up, correct? And it's very easy for them to kind of pack trauma down really far down inside, and a lot of that trauma we see now like comes from childhood. But I think that's because it's really easy for the veteran to put that armor on and go out and do their job. I also see that with the spouses. It is really easy for the spouses to put armor on, to be able to pack all of that trauma down inside. And what we're seeing is kind of when the veteran gets out when the veteran goes to and possibly goes to a psychedelic journey, and their armor is ripped off and they're kind of vulnerable. The spouses are left kind of still with that armor on and with all of that trauma. So I think that's too where we see a lot of the secondary PTSD come up is when the veteran or the partner comes back from these psychedelic journeys and their armor's ripped off, and you still have this partner with the armor on, and they're so used to being in these positions like Grace was talking, and they're really they don't know what this is anymore, right? So I think that too is something that just to point out, just being able to give spouses something that they know is for themselves, and that they can also be seen and be heard and take their armor off and feel safe. Like that's something that's been really amazing to watch.
Brilliant. Yeah. And there's so much here to unpack.
Yes.
And I'm immediately saying, like, oh, cool. Like, what would a psychiatrist think here? This is fun. Traditional psychiatrists, not the cool ones. You know who you are. But this idea of a spouse who wasn't necessarily, directly exposed to that kind of stuff, but then getting substantial help by having support, but then also a robust psychedelic experience to help bring it together and heal. That's really interesting to me. So I'm kind of curious about how are you all looking at this long term? Like I'm excited because from what I understand, there was Heroic Heart's first domestic retreat in Oregon was somewhat recently. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. We had one at the end of last year.
Right. And that's a really big deal. Like everybody would have to fly to Costa Rica or something crazy like that before, which is a logistical burden, a financial burden, both to the people and to Heroic Hearts, right? If we're trying to help a lot of people, saving money on flights could really help. But I don't know, how do you all like to think about potentially bringing this domestic to the US?
Well, I think it's a project that we most certainly have got our eyes on already. As you rightfully pointed out, we ran, I think, one of the first group retreats that was done in Oregon last year. We have plans to run many more in the summer of this year and going forward. And part of that model of how we're trying to do that, as I sort of listed at the start, this isn't just about those 5, 6, 7 hours one spends lying on the floor, with it all going on, right? It's really about the preparation and the integration and the community side of it. And so with bringing our retreats to Oregon and trying to get more of a program established there, also what we're trying to do is also establish this community within the US and within Oregon to start with, where you have that support on the ground. So veterans within Oregon can come through the Heroic Hearts program in Oregon, get the treatment, but then have, peer support on the ground around them to help them with that integration. And one thing I really see, and I've been incredibly lucky to have been welcomed into the Heroic Hearts family. I'm serving in the British Army myself, and as a neuroscientist was incredibly keen to be a huge part of it. But what we are, trying to achieve is that it becomes much more of this sort of self-sustainable family model in some ways, in that one veteran helps another. And when we take people through these experiences, we're not just saying, okay, here are your 3 designated sessions with your coach afterwards, because that isn't how this works. When I've looked at the retreats that I've been a part of, and I look at the WhatsApp groups or Signal groups or whatever, years later, people are popping up saying, hey, mate, I had a really bad day. Or, hey, I saw this and it reminded me of you guys. And so keeping those communities going, that kind of snowball effect of, one person heals and turns to the next person and helps heal them. That is something that can only really be achieved, I think, if we start to bring operations on the ground. because it's quite difficult to do that, as you say, when we're having to fire people off plane by plane into the Amazon jungle and bring them back.
I think I definitely want to touch on that community piece, because that is, thank you, Grace, for talking about that, because that is huge. And I think looking at veterans, and especially also their family members, and what we see on a lot of this research data is the piece that they are missing the most, right? When they go to war, you're in a community, you're in a group that actually will do anything for each other. And when the wives are at home, they're in their community, they're in their group. They get out, they move away from that area, and they feel very isolated. They feel very alone. I think, doing these retreats in Oregon and hopefully, in Colorado shortly, I hope, we can create these communities across the U.S. that the veterans and the family members can come together. The biggest part of these retreats is the prep and the integration. Like, we do not want veterans or family members going to Mexico, having this, or wherever they go, Peru, Mexico, Costa Rica, and they have this amazing retreat for 5 to 7 days, and then they go home and they have to integrate into their day-to-day with kids and family and work, and they don't know what to do, and they're vulnerable, and then right back into the place, maybe even worse than they were previously. So building this community piece around them, giving them the tools to be able to integrate into their day-to-day, that is the most important piece that, I truly think, and I think Heroic Hearts does as well. I think the peer support system that we're trying to build here in the States too, and that we are building with these communities in the country, are huge, because not only are we going to give the veterans and their family members the tools to heal, but we're giving them the tools to also support other veterans and family members too. So, it's going to be a snowball effect. And I think this is probably the most exciting thing that we are doing now.
That's brilliant. So obviously there's so many ways you could do this digitally. What does it look like digitally right now? And what are you hoping to do for connection and community long term? And then let's also talk a little bit about what it in person looks like outside of sessions.
Okay, I was like, digitally.
Well, at the moment, we do group calls with all of our veterans before and after the retreats, which they often do with many of the facilitators that will be there on the ground with them at the retreat program. And then, like I say, we foster these kind of groups with it. Groups who went on retreats together to stay in contact with each other through various forms of social network. But we also have an alumni. We have an alumni group that once a month, I think it is, we have a call, and that's led by Alistair at Heroic Hearts Project, and often that can sort of be, hey, we're going to learn 20 minutes on, a new tool of how to, de-stress or whatever, and then a bit more of a sharing part of it. So we already kind of keep that going. In terms of what it might look like, I imagine if we could start to build networks of veterans up in enough density, we could start to put on, once a month, we're going to meet in X place in the center of Denver, for instance. And anyone who's, been on a Heroic Hearts retreat can come and meet. And that would be the sort of thing we would want to do. But beyond that, it can't all come from Heroic Hearts, right? Heroic Hearts is the seed from which we hope this will all grow. And the people who will come through our program and learn from our program can say to you, can you help me do something for these people? I'm going to run it. I'm going to, take on that responsibility, but show me what the model is. Show me what are the things that are important and I need to think about. And then Heroic Hearts can help that one person help 10 people. So we start to kind of bring it from there.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I also think, just to kind of So Joe, our retreats, the way that they look like, yes, we use the signal chat like Grace said as well, and those do the women or the men or both are very active on that signal chat for years to come, which I think just shows a lot about our program. But then, for example, Heroic Hearts will have their monthly calls. Hope Project also has. And we are again underneath Heroic Heart's umbrella, but we do have weekly calls for women that they can hop on for their integration that are on Zoom. We do host workshops, mindfulness, breathwork workshops, yoga workshops, trauma release energy workshops, and do also have some just spouse calls too. That for spouses who weekly we do these calls for spouses who want to just support their veteran, and if they are going through a retreat. So I think we have a lot of resources, and again, bringing this to the States, like in Oregon, we do like personalized meetups as well, like where they can actually be in person and meet with those people consistently after your retreats, or meet with them on Zoom. So it's definitely growing.
That's outstanding. And I heard earlier there's an interest in having people connect more locally, like so they can't. So, for instance, having kind of an affinity group retreat, like say everybody's from some region. Could you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
I think, because, yeah, Grace and I
Alison,
were
you go.
talking. Oh, no, go ahead, Grace, you can go.
No, I'm sure we were probably about to say the same thing, but I think that's definitely something that we really want to do, and we will have been speaking, as I say, about we're really hoping that we're going to be able to run as many retreats as we would like to in the US, and that the kind of rules around that will be such that it allows us to do it in a meaningful way, and bringing kind of groups together would be kind of part of that. We need to be able to run these group sessions, particularly within veterans, for many of the reasons Alison said. Veterans spend their entire military careers in groups. I think it's pertinent that they heal in groups as well. So having the sites in the US where we're allowed to do that in groups would be wonderful. But I think that's a fabulous idea, Joe. And we do actually run alumni retreats at Heroic Hearts, where we allow people who've already been through the program, if they feel like they want to go again and they can financially support themselves to do that, then we do. And hopefully as our network grows, I think that's a fantastic idea to try and geographically link them so we can get more of this in-person support going.
That's brilliant. So, do you ever see any kind of drug war related shame pushback from veterans or spouses in this kind of project that you all are a part of?
Honestly, I don't, but I think a lot of the reason is that by the time they're talking to me, then they've made the decision, right? So that is part of it. But another veteran really spelled it out clearly to me once, and basically said, by the time I've got to this point, I've been 10 years active service, did 3 tours of the Middle East. I've tried 3 or 4 different interventions for post-traumatic stress disorder. None of them have worked. I've watched half of my section commit suicide. At this point, whether it's illegal or not, it doesn't even factor into my decision on whether or not I'm going to do it. Because by that point, you've been through so much rubbish, right? That the idea that the drug is illegal kind of it isn't part of the decision making for many. But of course there is a wider stigmatization of drug use, and throughout pretty much all militaries over the world, drug use is strictly forbidden and you are drug tested as such. But we know that the VA is looking at this and talking about this and looking at doing research. We know that there are people at the higher echelons of military command talking about this, talking about the outcomes of the MAPS trial on PTSD, talking about the work of institutions like Heroic Hearts Project. because how can they not? We've seen an abject failure to support the veterans and families who have served us and served us hard over the last however many wars, and we're not exactly facing peaceful times to come. So they better come up with decent ways of supporting people on the back end if they think that they are going to continue the never-ending stream of people coming in the front end. Sorry, political rant over.
That's perfect. Yeah, I don't ever really see that either, Joe. I do see and feel from spouses, just fear of how it could possibly change their spouse or change them. But I really don't hear anything about the illegal aspect of it. Again, they're kind of, this is their last ditch effort, and they are coming to us knowing that this is something that they want to do. There are a lot of spouses and veterans that come to us saying, "Oh my gosh, I've never touched anything. Like, I don't do any medicine," and that's kind of where the fear is coming from, but not alluding to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for sharing that. It's funny. I like, Grace, how you said there's drug testing and all this stuff, and we don't have to go too far down this road, but I think a lot of veterans I know, most of them, because I kind of live in a really special niche in my world here, but a lot of people have found this and found it helpful kind of on their own, which is fascinating to me. Yeah, kind of in tandem with Heroic Hearts Project and other other groups doing this work. It's fascinating to see how it's played out, and it's spreading. So I'm really excited about that. So what are kind of some of the biggest wins in the last couple of years that y'all have seen?
Well, pretty big wins in terms of Heroic Hearts is just the number of veterans that we've been able to help. And big win for me is the amount of research that we've then been able to do. So we've collected quite a lot of veterans now. We've got sort of 60 that have been kind of pulled out and analysed. And what we're seeing is absolutely overwhelming improvement in a whole number of different mental health outcomes, but also these sort of conversations about quality of life and connections with their families, with their wives, with their children. So a lot of that is a huge win for me and for Heroic Hearts in terms of we've, shown pretty black and whitely what we're doing is having a major effect, an effect in the right directions in terms of improving these people's lives.
That's great. And Allison, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the merge with Heroic Hearts was definitely the largest win for me in this last year. With that, we're not just the liaison to different retreats, but we've been able to kind of create these spouse retreats as well. And with that, the testimonies, I mean, I hate to speak in absolutes, and I realize that everyone still has their own journey and there are ups and downs, but all of the women that have come to these spouse retreats have given some sort of positive feedback on these retreats and come to me and said, my quality of life when I get home, my relationship, like Grace said, with my children, myself as a mother, myself as a wife, as a friend, is significantly better. And, I didn't ever realize that I could feel this way in my day-to-day. And I think for me, the generational healing that we're seeing, the families that are coming back together, after deployments, after, being gone for 300 days out of the year, and then seeing these families come back together and be so strong after this psychedelic healing. It's really beautiful to me to see. Again, I am not saying that spouses have to go on their own retreats. We can definitely support them, even if that's not something that they want to do. We have coaching and other things. But when we see a veteran go on a retreat and then 3 months later see his spouse go or her spouse go on a retreat and then come together, it's so phenomenal. And then the healing that we see trickle down into the children, and even the behaviors of the children now are different because their parents are coming back together. So I think that is definitely the most exciting piece for me, is having the entire family unit included in this.
Brilliant. So how is this different for women? And we don't have to go too deep into this, but we chatted about it a little bit before we started rolling, but any kind of perspective there?
I mean, there's definitely a difference between the rates of post-traumatic stress disorder in women and the rates of post-traumatic stress disorder in men. The exact reason why that is still kind of unclear, but to give you an example, if we just talk about women in the military, it's around 10% of them that will develop PTSD, where it's around 5 or 6% for men. Now, that could be because women are far, unfortunately, more likely to be subject to sexual abuse in the military than men. But that doesn't seem to be enough to kind of tell the full picture. Why is it that women are developing, military or no military, post-traumatic stress disorder at different rates than men? And is the presentation the same as it is in men? And I think that we have to consider a lot about the kind of psychosocial components of post-traumatic stress. And that is why I think what we're doing with the Hope Project is so important, to really kind of drive into not just looking at post-traumatic stress disorder as like, you saw a bad thing, therefore you've got it and we can take you to this thing, and you didn't, so we're not going to, because that isn't what PTSD is. And when we look at the presentation of PTSD in women, it seems that there's a lot more association with them feeling sort of threatened within their environment, be that not from a physical threat, but just from, the behaviors of society around them. So being kind of in a less powerful position, in able to kind of control their lives often. But it can also possibly be linked to some biological reasons. We know that levels of estrogen, for instance, lower levels of estrogen are associated with higher levels of PTSD. That could be because on a level of neurobiology, estrogen has some potentially neuroprotective effect in terms of the development. Potentially it's involved in certain aspects of memory formation or memory extinction or fear extinction. So there's a huge amount here to be unpacked when we look specifically at, okay, do psychedelics do psychedelics help for post-traumatic stress disorder? Yes. Do psychedelics help for post-traumatic stress disorder in women? Well, that we're not as sure about, because most of the work that I've done and all the research that has been collected around psychedelics and PTSD by many other groups has largely looked at men and largely looked at male members of the military, which obviously don't account for these potential nuances within women and what that might mean, and therefore what that might mean when we apply it to a psychedelic model. So, for instance, a massive psychedelic trip that's all kind of very heroic might be exactly what somebody who has been in the army needs. But if you're talking about potentially their spouse, kind of sending them through a huge, big psychedelic experience might not be, exactly the right thing for them. Maybe we need to think more about the preparation side of that, or the integration side, or, maybe the dose doesn't need to be as high, or many other things. I'll pause there. But yeah, I definitely think that there is a hugely novel component to thinking about what PTSD in women and secondary PTSD in women is and how we treat it.
Amazing. Thank you. The brain injury thing always comes up for me. I read a fascinating book on TCE. Is that the acronym? Trauma, chronic CTE. Sorry,
Yeah.
chronic traumatic encephalopathy or something like that. And like female soccer players, sorry, footballers, seem to have a higher rate of brain injury than men, and more severity as well. And this is kind of a new area of research that we don't really have fleshed out yet. And psychedelics are showing pretty good result in terms of healing brain injury. I actually had a pretty aggressive one about a year and a few months ago, and psychedelics have certainly played an important role in recovery. But is this something y'all have seen, or is this a question that you all are interested in?
It's 100% a question that Heroic Hearts is interested. It's actually one of our kind of primary research interests. We were incredibly lucky to partner with Beckley Retreats over last year, and we ran two separate retreats that were specifically for veterans who had experienced traumatic brain injuries for precisely the reason that you just mentioned there, Joe. They're highly prevalent in the military. They are highly associated with the development of post-traumatic stress disorder, and they are very badly treated. So we specifically did that in order to look at this group and how we may be affecting them by taking them through a psilocybin retreat. And the results from that was where we did a lot of the EEGs and the cognitive testing, and we found really, really great results from that. The military is, of course, a pretty dangerous place to get your head banged against something. But the other really important component I think sometimes forget is how close you were to something that went bang. When things go bang, they cause a huge shockwave of energy to come out of them, and that passes through your physical body if you're standing next to it, including your neuronal tissues, which will cause them trauma. So yeah, we definitely are very interested in head trauma. But how it is more prevalent in women. I haven't actually read that report. I think it's very interesting. We see a similar thing with ACL injuries in female footballers as well. And yeah, having been a female in the military myself, I can certainly speak to the fact that we get a much higher rate of all physical injuries from taking part in military service. And I don't know if that would be associated with head traumas as well, but there we are.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. I think there's a lot left to discover here for sure. Yeah, the ibogaine stuff is just so fascinating around this. Yeah, so I'm very curious to see where it will go. So is Heroic Hearts, from what I understand, is usually focused on psilocybin and ayahuasca. Is there planning to be any kind of evolution given what's happening in Colorado with the law changes here? And I can spell that out. So, for instance, it's effectively legal in Colorado to possess, use, grow mescaline except peyote, DMT, probably, I think the law includes 5-MeO DMT, iboga, non-synthetic iboga, or ibogaine, and then psilocybin, psilocin. So there's like now 4 categories legal domestically in a sense. That said, I know Heroic Hearts is a federally registered nonprofit, so there's always like edgy stuff when we're dealing with state level legal versus federal legal. But I don't know, has there been any kind of discussions there that you can talk about?
Yeah. We've definitely chatted a little bit about, obviously we're doing this in Oregon, and we are wanting to bring this to Colorado once it becomes, psilocybin does become legal. We've chatted with a few organizations here in Colorado that we would partner with to do some retreats, but still definitely kind of, waiting for things to become federally legal, since you're absolutely right. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. So
cool. So let's see what else here.
And I think slightly, as Heroic Hearts, we're slightly substance agnostic. the purpose of our operations is to take people through these healing retreat programs in this group setting with this kind of community piece around them. Sort of what they do is not really the main point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's
No, that's
absolutely
cool.
right. Yeah. I would say, Joe, that, a very small amount of our program is actually taking the medicine, right? That's a
Mm-hmm.
very, very, very small amount of our program. Our program is the prep moving up to it, but I think even more the integration and building the community of thousands of veterans and family members afterwards too.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's obviously a very big and very robust organization. How many people are involved in the organization right now as, let's say, workers, volunteers, stuff like that?
That's a pretty difficult one to, I guess, judge just because of the coaching network and how we've built that in terms of, people who go through the program, if they really feel they want to give back, can come and then train and become a coach. So I couldn't possibly give you an answer on that. And you would have to speak to Jesse or Jared or one of the other key teams. But I don't know, the Heroic Hearts family seems to be ever growing, but it's certainly very much a close-knit family. I feel very
Yeah.
much a huge part of it and warmed and
I think we
welcomed by
have
everyone.
Yeah, I think we have about, again, it's growing. I think we have about 40 coaches on our staff right now at Heroic Hearts, and about 10 from Hope Project that we brought over and merged with them. And I would say maybe 11, between 7 and 11 people on our part-time to full-time staff. But like Grace said, it's constantly growing, and with the coaching program and the ambassador program too. We want you to continue just being part of Heroic Hearts once you've gone through the program. So the ambassador program is huge.
That's great. We just had a graduation ceremony here for our Vital program. We had Alex Horton. Are you familiar with Alex?
Yes, I love Alex.
Graduated and gave us a beautiful poem to near the opening of the graduation ceremony. It was so great, so moving. And I had Alex on the show, I think, really at the start, maybe, of that Vital program, and it was really awesome. So it's cool to see that we're able to help support in some way Heroic Hearts Project, and I hope we can keep doing it. It's I think so important. Like I don't know if people really understand how difficult reentry can be. Even if you weren't in combat, even if you weren't, getting shot at all the time. Like this is, it's so different. It's the cultural experience of reentry has to be so crazy, both in the UK and the US and elsewhere, I bet too. It's, so regimented, so specific, and then it's this cush weird culture that you're coming back to that's like almost alien again. Right, Grace?
Yeah, so we actually have a measure within our research called the Military to Civilian Questionnaire, where we ask specifically about this. How do you feel in terms of your ability to integrate back into civilian life? And we see a huge positive impact from going through these retreats on measures of that.
Brilliant. So let's see, what else can we jump into? Is there anything else we missed so far that we want to include in this particular conversation?
Yeah, I think I would like to maybe talk a little bit more just about the kind of the women's point side of this and sort of, kind of step a little away from Heroic Hearts and a bit more towards the Hope Project. And I guess I'll let Allison kind of frame it a bit more in terms of like why she really thinks that it is important for the whole family to do this. But from my perspective, beside the point that we already kind of spoke about of that need to have potentially your partner kind of go through a similar experience so that they can understand, you've got a healed veteran and then having a spouse that goes through that program can be hugely complementary. And then what that means for the entire family unit and the children. But if we just talk about this in terms of women, in terms of sort of females who are going through psychedelic retreats, I think what we've been trying to achieve, Alison and I, with our next piece of research, which is coming up, is to really understand this from that perspective. What is the research that we need to know for the wives of veterans who are going through this? So we are looking at including a lot more measures around that, looking at the family dynamics and how they feel in terms of their emotional status within the family, the connectedness with the family, how they feel the experience has changed in terms of, not just their symptoms of stress or anxiety or trauma, but also in terms of their ability to parent. And I think, being a lot of what we kind of see and hear when I go to a lot of these retreats, it all starts on what happened with that person's parents. And when you see people go through these retreats and you see them come out the other end, you often hear this come out of their mouths: I cannot wait to go home and see my children because I now understand X about them, or I now understand Y about them. And when you get this sort of secondary PTSD around women, they go into survival mode. And when you're in survival, you don't get to be that really engaging mother and parent often. And so by going through this experience, we're really hoping that that is something we might be able to achieve. And that's something with the research that we are also trying to get at. Are we kind of seeing that as a signal from our data that we are having that tangible difference in terms of people's real everyday families and lives?
Yeah. Allison, is there anything about that project you want to add?
Yeah, no, I absolutely would. And thank you, Grace, for bringing that up, just because I think, I love doing this work with Grace, because I will say that a lot of the women that I speak to, their first like aha moment to me when I talk to them is like, oh my gosh, I did not think there was something for me. Like, this is for me? You mean like I get to do my own research? I get to do my own retreat? And it's really hard to hear that sometimes. But I mean, I look back on my own personal story and I'm like, wow, you are so wrapped up in your partner's, what they're doing, and making sure that the kids are okay, and making sure that the house is okay, and making sure that you're okay, that you kind of forget, not even really making sure that you're okay. I don't think you have time for that, but you really do forget yourself. And I think now us showing the women that there is something for them and that they can be seen, and they can be seen without all of the armor that I was talking about, that is our first step to allowing them to heal. I want to speak a little bit about too. I know you asked, Joe, like how we do this differently with women, and specifically with spouses in the Hope Project. We really have created these retreats differently than what the veterans go through. Our retreats in Mexico, they are just one journey of psilocybin, and they are heavy, heavy, heavy on integration days afterwards. What we've seen happen is, women, it's a little bit easier once you get women into a group together, as they have that community and they feel safe, and we open up that space for them. I mean, it's like floods coming out, like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting for this day for, I don't know how long. It's all been stuck inside me. And we have those circles, and then we have the medicine day, and then we have 3 full days of integration where we can teach them these attainable tools that they can bring home with them, that they're able to that they're able to work with and include their children in yoga, in meditation, in journaling, and bring that back home to their family, so then their integration can be a lot easier, and they know that like this is within them. So that's kind of how we've created these retreats with our partner in Mexico, and what we've seen has supported them. And I think it's just us really listening to them, and us being able to give them this piece of their own too.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm really curious about the relational piece. So we're kind of beating around the bush here, but like this this concept of somebody goes and does some really, really deep healing and transformation work, and their spouse or partner isn't necessarily engaged in that process yet for whatever reason. And sometimes that can create a big rift between folks. I think we've seen this in some of the clinical research at big hospitals even. But what do you think is going on there? What do you like to think about or talk about in relation to that topic?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here only because when my husband went to do Ibogaine 7 years ago, I was not the ball of love for him to come home to, like people like to call it. I was pissed. I was angry. I was so mad. And I think a lot of that came from, hey, I have been home with our 5 kids while you have been gone and deployed, and we've moved 22 times. And now you got to go, and you went and you did this medicine, and you came home and started saying you felt healed, and you felt, everything was beautiful, and you started talking a different way. And I didn't feel, I think it feels like they're almost on a deployment, like you're not involved at all. So that's where we created this coaching piece, right? We created this piece where we could involve the spouses and them be able to say to their own coach, hey, I feel jealous, I feel resentful. And that coach come back to them and say, it's okay to feel that way. But two, them coming home and not knowing how to hold space for that different person. And it's not that they're different, but their reactions are different to things. As a lot of spouses see when their veterans come home, they're reactive. They have to walk on eggshells around them because they don't want a certain reaction to come out of them, or they're very used to living that way. I heard once from a woman. She said, my son is not quite sure what to do now with his dad because he's not used to him not yelling all of the time, and he's almost scared of who that person is. So I think we really have to think about that and say, wow, we really need to involve the family members and let them know what's going on too when these veterans go and they go and do this healing. And just make sure again that we're listening to the spouses, that we're listening to the children, that we're able to support them. Because you're absolutely right, Joe, more often than not, we will get that until we talk to them about those feelings being okay to have and making sure that we see those feelings from them too.
Cool. Thanks for that. Grace, anything to add on that?
I think Allison has sort of made it kind of very, very clear. I think as much of what we do at Heroic Hearts and the Hope Project is about education and educating the whole family unit. And like you say, not having a situation where we take these veterans off and, fill them with love and light and then send them back into a situation when they've got a seriously pissed off wife, right? That often is not going to be the result that we want. And so having institutions like the Hope Project and Heroic Hearts are as important for our messaging and for our coaching and for educating as it is for actually taking people through the experience.
Yeah, thank you for that. Kind of curious about what is the role of the coaches inside HHP?
Allison, I guess I'll let you talk a bit about, because you've been much more hands-on with the coaches for her Hope Project.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, I think the role of the coaches is, so at Heroic Hearts and Hope Project, we offer, let's say someone decides to go through a journey, they have been approved medically, they have been approved to go through this journey. The coaches offer 3 one-to-one prep sessions before that journey. They also will get 3 group sessions before that journey where they get to meet their cohort. They get to really kind of start that bond with the people that are going to be in their cohort. On the back end of that, the coaches, offer the 3 one-to-one integration sessions and the 3 Zoom or group Zoom as well for integration. I think on top of that, I think we tend to forget coaches as we really have to remember that it, like healing the healers almost. I love that kind of saying, because we have to remember what this work that the coaches are doing and the energy that they're also bringing on. You know, our coaches are friends to their clients. Our coaches are, they're being supportive of their clients. I mean, they are, you know, prepping them for the journey. Some of them actually are liaisons, and they have been through our liaison training, and they're actually going to the journeys, and they're holding the space for them at the retreats. And then afterwards is too, and just always being available for our clients. You know, we have very specific coaches too. We have spouse coaches. We have Gold Star spouse coaches. We have veteran coaches. We have some coaches that aren't in the veteran space because, you know, that might be what they're more comfortable with. So we have a very wide variety of coaches that have different trainings that support our veterans and family members that go through these retreats, and really help them create this community on the back end too.
That's outstanding. Wow. I love that there's different specialties too. I think that's super important.
Yep. Extremely important.
Right. Yeah, we're noticing more and more affinity groups and people like other people. The more similar you are to your coach or helper, the more kind of, relationally comfortable they might be, and therefore better performance in that relationship with the objective. So it's really cool. I'm really happy to hear that. Now, in terms of other major big projects that you all want to get done in the next couple of years, what kind of stuff are you all excited about?
Well, we are hopefully very soon to embark on a new piece of research. It will be sort of similar to the last piece of research we did, very much following people through the Heroic Hearts and Hope Project retreats. But we're going to add a whole bunch of new bells and whistles because that's what we want to do. So my big excitement piece is to get this new project running. That will allow us to collect not only the data, similar data to what we've collected before, but as I said, very much looking at a lot of those secondary PTSD endpoints, a lot about that compassion and family unit piece and how we kind of understand how that might change. But for me, my huge part of this and why I'm so grateful to be a part of this with the Hope Project is to really look at it from the female perspective. I happily talk all day and all night about the importance of researching psychedelic use in women's bodies. And in this new research, the females who go through Heroic Hearts Project or the Hope Project, be they veterans or spouses, will also be asking them a lot more questions about things like their menstrual cycle or menopause symptoms, which I think are extremely important to how many of these mental illnesses display themselves. I think it's extremely important to consider about when we time our psychedelic experiences. And I think it's really important to look at what the outcome measures on those particular symptoms might be, because that could be extremely important too. And if we don't start collecting this data in cohorts of women who are going through this, then when all of these sort of excellent, great clinical trials that are being done who aren't paying very much attention to the sort of difference in sex, you know, they will all get sort of prescribed or licensed as medication without us yet again really understanding what these substances look and feel like in women's bodies. So that is my big project ahead of me, to do this as Hystelica, a company focused purely on women's psychedelic use, but also as this part of Heroic Hearts and the Hope Project, because women's PTSD is something that is still quite a mystery and still needs an awful lot of thought, and so does how we heal it.
Yes, absolutely agreed. There's so much there. Like it's male bodies are often very far more stable, I guess, like static maybe is the way to put it, versus like the built-in cycles in female bodies, and we just don't really understand so much here.
Absolutely.
I got yelled at by a doctor recently for bringing this up, by the way.
Well, we yelled at what? Because you brought it up, or because you didn't know what you were talking about? What was that?
It's total bullshit that we don't know enough about female bodies. Like it was like, come on, dude.
Trust me, we know very little about female bodies and how they work. It's disgraceful, given the fact we're sitting here in 2024 putting computer chips into people's brains, and we still don't understand how to diagnose half of the female disorders that exist. But here we are. That's why women like Allison and I are going to start doing it on our own.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Cool. Well, we're about at time. Is there anything you all want to raise, or links, or books, or people you want to send or shout out here?
Just our website for sure, Heroic Hearts Project. And I mean, you can find that online, and the Hope Project is embedded into Heroic Hearts website, so that's where you can find us.
Yeah, and I will second those and add my final one in, which would be for Hystelica.com for anyone who is interested in why psychedelic use for women is important.
All right. Well, thank you both for being here. Really hope we can have you on individually in the future. And please keep doing what you're doing. It's really important work. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Really nice.